Hi, my name is Rob Kelly. I'm Senior Systems Engineer with VMware, specialising in the AirWatch product and the mobility space. So today's session is how to integrate with Azure AD using a traditional method of the AirWatch Cloud Connector so we can bolt straight into the LDAP. So I'm going to take you through some slides and take you through the Azure portal and show you kind of how to build out your virtual networks, your domain names, the server, and how it all kind of connects together. So just a little bit of background. It's important to make a note of the region when you're deploying your virtual networks and your machines, because if you deploy to two different regions, then they won't be able to see each other. So for the purpose of demo, I use West Europe or United Kingdom. Microsoft do many different types of virtual machines depending on the size of the machine you want, disk, RAM, CPU, etc. If it's purely for an ACC, I found the A1 instance seems to be adequate. A0 is too small on RAM and disk space and CPU, and it just doesn't work efficiently. But it's really scalability, so whilst I'll be talking about an A1, you may want to use an A2 for an extra level of processor power and RAM. Some components we'll be talking about are chargeable by Azure. These prices are good at the time I took the screenshots, but again, just be aware that the virtual machines cost money to keep running. It's computed by hour, so just be aware of the costs. So first question is, why don't we use SAML? Well, we can't sync users and groups using SAML. We just make a call to the system to say, is this user valid? And that'll add in some basic information to AirWatch. So that means we can't restrict deployments of profiles and applications based on user group membership, for example, in the Active Directory. And we can't control via group membership who can and can't enroll devices. So Microsoft Azure have two portals for administrating everything. They have their new modern one, which looks great. At the time I put this together, not everything had been added in that is present in the classic portal. And personally, I just find the classic portal a lot easier to use. So we've got a list here of what is needed and in which order we need to configure it. So the first thing we need is the Active Directory domain name. So for the purpose of my demo, I have a domain name called jazzy.co.uk. Then we create our virtual network. Then we attach the virtual network and the LAN and the Active Directory, together. We can't change these once it's done, so it's important that you do it at time of deploying this. Then we spin up a virtual machine attached to the LAN. We join the server to the Active Directory. We then traditionally install the AirWatch Cloud Connector and configure the AirWatch LDAP, much in exactly the same way as if it was an on-prem installation that we're integrating with. So I'll just switch over to my Chrome browser. So this is our Active Directory area. We can see we've got our corporate VMware one at the top. I'd use that, but I don't have the permissions to. So we've got my Jazz DOM or Jazzy domain. So if you want to add one, assuming the customer's already got one, otherwise you wouldn't be able to log on here. But if you wanted to add a new one, just follow this wizard through. But I'll talk about one that's already there, because there's likelihood your customers is already going to be there. So to access any of the objects in this portal, you click on the blue box at the beginning. So when you first deploy an Active Directory, it will give you the default Microsoft one. So it'll be whatever your domain name is, .onmicrosoft.com. Then we can add our unique domain. So just by using the new add. And this is where we put in the domain name and tick this box. So that will put in our live domain that we want to use, theirbusiness.com. So I've got my jazzy.co.uk. Then we need to move along to our configure tab. Just wait for Microsoft servers to catch up. Okay, So this is where we gave it a name when first deploying it. So we need to scroll down to domain services, and we need to enable domain services for this directory, meaning we want to use it as a proper LDAP directory. So we would move that to yes. To the right of this box, you'll see the word pending. Now that will be there for some time. It can be anything from 20 minutes to an hour. I'll show you from my PowerPoint. See, here it says pending. This can take a while to complete. So once you set that, then we can continue and create our virtual network. Doing virtual networks. So here's the one I created. So we just have a look at that. So you'll see here we've got 2 IP addresses. So this is a DNS servers that this virtual network is going to use to find your LDAP domain controller. We don't need to deploy a domain controller, that's all hosted by Microsoft. But we need the DNS to be able to join our virtual machine to the Active Directory and to find our users. So where do we get these IPs from? So we go back to the domain. Once the pending part is completed on the directory part, we'll see a couple of IPs. One will appear once the pending is completed, then sometime later the second one will appear. So then we go back to our virtual network which we create. We type in the name of our domain. So in this one, jazdom. Or jazzy.co.uk. Just copy that because it's the same as the one from the that we saw. So that will now serve domain requests for that. So now any machine we attach to this LAN will be able to see these DNS servers, which will have records of where our domain controllers are. So when we join our virtual machine to the Active Directory, it can find them. This is exactly the same as a standard kind of on-premise Active Directory DNS setup. So when you join a machine, a Windows 10 machine to your Active Directory, it does a DNS call to find out where your domain controllers are. If it can't find them, you can't join. So this is why this is really important we do this. And finally, we need to be able to spin up a virtual machine. This is quite important that we do this in a particular manner. Don't want to just use, we want to do a gallery template because we need to be able to choose the virtual network. If we did a quick create, it would just spin up a virtual machine which wouldn't be attached to any internal networks. It would be a standalone server that we could remote control or remote desktop to from the internet. Maybe we just want to use it as a web server or something, but it won't have any internal connectivity whatsoever. So we want to do from gallery. I'll choose the top one. Next. Virtual machine name. My demo DC server. Standard tier. I'll change that to basic. Machine name, so let's take out the spaces. So this is what the machine's actually going to be called. This will be our administrator. Change that to A1. So I'll just call this admin. Give it a password. Okay. Next. Oh, okay. Pop-ups everywhere. Okay. So remember we have to put this in the correct region we want it to be in. Well, for virtual networks already there, we choose the virtual network. So in this case, I've already created my virtual network. Remember that's where I put in my DNS names, etc. So I can just attach it to that. If we created the quick start server, we wouldn't have this choice to create it to a virtual network. Down here we've got a summary of ports that are being mapped externally to internally. So once we've deployed this, it will randomly select a port which will translate to the standard internal RDP port. We'll see all that on the server. Somebody else in the Azure has already got this this name, so I'll just give it something else, make it a bit more unique. So the VM agent is Microsoft's virtual machine agent, in the same way we have our VMware agent for virtual machines. And if we hit tick, that'll then create that server. I won't do it now, but I'll show you one I prepared earlier. So this is the one I prepared earlier. We can see it's running. Click on the name, configure to show us what sort of machine it is. It's on a basic machine tier. I won't go into that. This is the kind of the Azure billing packages and high availability and things like that. So virtual machine size is A1. Let's see what my subnet IP range is. Go to endpoints. This is where it generates the RDP port. So this is the port we would use from the internet to connect to that machine. So when you start up remote desktop connection, you would specify then on the end of the address the port number. Then it'll go and connect. So here is my default setup Microsoft virtual machine, and I've installed the AirWatch Cloud Connector in exactly the same way we would do for an on-premise installation. We can see the services running here. So we've gone for a standard. I've logged into the machine. I've joined it to my Active Directory, and I've installed the ACC. So we go to the AirWatch console now. It's worth just noting with the new releases of AirWatch, it's now the ACC, or the AirWatch Cloud Connector, is now called the VMware Enterprise Systems Connector. So down here we can hit the test button. Yeah, that's active, great. So now we can move on to configure our Active Directory. So you can see I've created this one here, test connection. Yeah, so I've got my bind user. I'll come back to users in the Azure portal in a minute, show you how to do that. But there's one thing you probably need to be aware of. So you're going to probably be deploying email profiles out to users. So we want to pre-fill their email address. Now, unless they're using the Office 365 Exchange mail system, they won't have an email address on their account. However, the user login name to the Azure AD will be their name at their domain. So for example, the demo I've done here, my email address would be rob@jazzy.co.uk. That'd be my login name. So we can map, you see the username is Sam account name, we can map email address to user principal name, which is rob@jazzy.co.uk, which is my login ID. So if the domain name you're using in the Azure AD is your live domain name, and you're using the naming format is the same as your email address, then that would just simply work. So we just need to change that email address. This changes mapping value from email address to user principal name. Then it will pull through and propagate correctly. Then we can push those out via mail profiles. So I'm just going to look at the users. So click on the domain, click on users. This is where we would administer our users. You can use the MMC traditional Active Directory users and computers MMC within the machine you created. However, a lot of things are limited. It's a little bit confusing. If you update things in there, such as a phone number, will overwrite what you see here. So it's probably just good practice just to kind of forget about the Active Directory users and computers MMC and do things from here. So clicking into this user, see what my username is. So you can see what I was saying. So if my username is Rob@jazzy.uk, when we map that through in the user's attributes, that's also my email address. We give them different user types, different email addresses, and so on and so forth. But you see there is no email address field on here. Okay, we can fill in some other information here. I'm not entirely sure how Microsoft save all this information. It's not all saved into the LDAP metadata. I think some of it's saved elsewhere, or they've got custom LDAP, because some of these settings I've not been able to then pull through into the AirWatch console, but they're only minor things. So just to summarize, the first thing we need to do is, in our Active Directory, is add our domain name to the domain that's already there. If it isn't one already there, then create it, then add it. So we will add our domain, go in here, domains, add our live one which we want to use. Then under directory integration, configure. I think this does a lot of back-end calls to see how the directory has been configured, so that's why it takes a little bit longer to load. Okay, so we're under domain services. We want to enable directory services to domain services directory, so that enables the LDAP piece, which is what we need to be able to talk to. So once we tick yes, this will say pending. Just a recap, it can take anything from 20 minutes to an hour for that to clear. Once it's gone to yes and the pending's disappeared, we'll get an IP address down here. Shortly after that, we'll get another IP address under here. Go to our networks and to configure. We enter those IP addresses in here with the domain that we wish to use. That then associates that network with that domain. Virtual machines, spin up a new machine from a gallery, attach it to the correct network, give it a username, give it a sizing. If you want to keep your costs down, keep the machine size down, keep it as a tier basic. Connect it to the network you've set up. Once it's up and running, you can remote desktop into the machine on the port that will specify on the machine configuration. Then you can join the machine to your Active Directory and then install the ACC following standard AirWatch VMware ACC installation documentation and map over the user email address to user principal name. I hope you found that useful, and thank you for your time.